in that the camera feed works fine. If you can switch over purely to the camera and then to the slides, make sure that everyone at the live event can see me, hear me properly. I'd like to get a written confirmation on my secondary device, and we're going to get started for today's webcast. So it seems everything works fine. So why don't you do our customary little exercise that we always do at such webcasts. Please type it into the chat box where you are dialing in from, where are you joining this event from, whether it's Brussels or way beyond. We would love to hear that, and that provides you a great chance to familiarize yourself with the chat box. In the meantime, let me warmly welcome everyone. My name is Andras Bennett. This is a live broadcast on the 21st of October from Brussels, where we are sharing information about the latest and greatest opportunity to pursue an EU career in 3 fascinating fields, as you will see in a moment. I'm just taking a quick look at the screen. I can see Budapest, Milan, and Greece, Cadiz, Spain, and certainly lots of other input coming in, but many of you are pretty close by in Brussels, and many others are from all over Europe and even beyond. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. We have technical support, Agi and Rita in the background in Budapest and me in Brussels. So let's get started, because we're going to spend about 60 minutes discovering and covering the fascinating opportunity of an EU career in energy, climate, and environment. Certainly, these are topics which are extremely popular, extremely current, very relevant, and you can really work on these topics with the European Commission and shape perhaps not even just European, even global policies around these matters. So I'm sure that a lot of you are extremely interested, and we're going to get into it right away. Hopefully the sound and technology and everything works fine. Usually restarting your device is the easiest and fastest solution. If you have any concerns, then you can move over to a different browser or use a secondary device like your phone or your tablet if you have one, and you can certainly follow everything. But we are also covering and recording everything. So before I do that housekeeping, a few words about my background. Some of you may know I'm a founder, co-founder of EU Training. You might be familiar with the Ultimate EU Textbook, which has been in publication since 2006, I believe. So quite many years. We're planning actually a new edition next year. So those of you who are interested may want to keep an eye out for that. But regardless, I used to be an EU official, and for many, many years now, I'm in the private sector. And one of the key things I do is helping candidates like yourselves prepare for EU careers and pass EPSO exams. So with that, let's go back to the slides. And the housekeeping that I hinted at is to underline that we're going to be sharing the recording and the slides with you almost immediately or very shortly after today's conversation. And we're going to also have not only the full recording and the slides, but the transcript as well. That's going to take us a little more time, but keep an eye out for that, and that's going to be available on our website. So with that, hopefully you'll be fully covered, and even if something you may not have understood or you may have missed will be available and you can look it up. But having said that, I'd like to emphasize that always the official source of information is the notice of competition that the EU institutions, or most notably EPSO, releases, available in the official journal of the European Union. So that's the authentic source of information. If there's any conflict between what I tell you and what you have seen there, obviously what you see in the official documents will take precedence. So that's my legal disclaimer, but we'll do our utmost to be as accurate and concise and comprehensive as we can be to provide you with this information, and not just the information, something you can read otherwise, but structure it and present it in a way that will help your preparation. So I'll also be sharing a couple of tips and ideas with you. And certainly those of you who are here at the live call, at the live webinar, can ask questions. And to the best of my abilities, I'm going to answer those. And Agi will be kind enough to feed that through my other screen. I'll be looking at those, answering those the best I can. If there are some questions that I cannot answer or we don't have time to cover, we'll make sure to follow up in some shape or form and make sure that no question is left unanswered. With that, those of you who might be watching this as a recording, or even those at the live session, but you have then some follow-up questions, feel free to send us messages through the customer support, and send those messages. They will be passed on to me or to one of our experts or our in-house team, and we'll answer that at any point in time. So there's no limitation to that, and this is a free service we're happy to provide. With that, let's actually get back to the essence of today's presentation, and a few words about how our company comes to talk about this topic and all EPSO exams and EU careers. So we've been around for quite many years. We've got over 100,000 users, and I think we even need to increase that number because it's increased significantly in the past few years. And aside from that, there are 57,000 or even more followers, fans, whatever it's called these days, are on Facebook. So there's a very lively, robust community there. So if you're on Facebook, you can find peers, competitors, and like-minded EU career enthusiasts to share information, commiserate and motivate each other, and make sure that you don't feel by yourself in this path of pursuing a European career and preparing for EPSO exams. Aside from that, there are a lot of different channels that we make available on social media. And not only that, but we have test packages, we have various linguistic versions and combination of the different tests. We're very proud to offer you webinars, a large number of webinars, not just information sessions like this one, but methodology ones. So I think that's more substantive for your preparation, more relevant for your preparation, so you can really learn about the tactical and practical ways to prepare for these competitions. So you can look these up. Many of them are free, some number are paid. Depending on the depth or depending on the complexity of the topic, you can certainly find those on our website. So with that, we're going to be sharing an exclusive offer at the very end of today's session. So that's going to be valid for 48 hours, and it gives you a special, unique discount on all of our digital products that you can purchase on our website. So with that, let's look at this opportunity, and I'm going to walk you through the different steps that you need to take to make the most of this competition. But first and foremost, it's not just making the most of. The most important is that you qualify and that you are eligible, and making sure that you meet all the formal and individual criteria for the profiles, so you can actually enter the competition and do your best and eventually pass it. So with that, what are the different steps of the application process? I'm going to go through each and every one of these. So before anything else, important to mention, just for the record, but it also has some practical relevance, how many places there are on the reserve list. First point, and we're going to get there later on, but already anticipating that step. Your aim as part of the EPSO, the European Personnel Selection Office competition, is to be placed on the reserve list. The entire competition, it's a selection procedure. This is not a recruitment process. And these two terms are often used interchangeably, but what we're looking at is to go through a series of steps, and the exam and the application and all of that being part of it, at the end of which you are placed on the reserve list. And that's what you see on the screen, how many positions are available for this particular competition, or the 3 profiles that are possible to choose from to be placed on the reserve list. And once you are on the reserve list, you become recruitable. That's when the European institutions, or in this particular case, the European Commission, can hire you for a specific post. It's a specialist competition, so the scope is kind of limited because we're talking about energy, climate, and environment. So it's not a generalist one. Therefore, the target institution is the European Commission, and the target DGs, the target Directorates General, are also pretty specific. So having said that, there are 54 places for energy, 49 places for climate, and 52 places for environment. You need to pick one or the other. You cannot apply for all three. So you need to make your choice depending on your profile and your professional expertise and background. So that's something we're going to be looking at very shortly. But it kind of informs you how many well, it does inform you how many places there are, but it kind of informs you about the opportunities or the probability, the likelihood, the chances of you succeeding, if you can have a rough estimate or a guesstimate how many applicants there might be for one profile or another, and then trying to reverse engineer your decision which profile to apply for, provided you qualify for all three or you qualify for more than one. If your profile is really, really in the energy field, or it's really, really in the environment field, and your expertise or your professional experience, something you've gained over the past few years, is really about one field or another, well, that certainly really channels you into one profile or another. But if your experience is more diverse or more horizontal, so to say, then you can evaluate those based on the number of places available, your degree, your background, your personal preferences, and a couple of other factors. So having said that, this is a given. So that's how many places they are planning to fill on the reserve list from which they will eventually recruit. And then application deadline, 22nd of November. As we always say, do not leave your application to the last moment. Make sure that you fill everything in time, and do not leave it for the last moment, because your personal circumstances might prevent you from finalizing it, or there might be some IT or server issues. Anything could happen. Make sure that you finish it on time. So with that, perhaps the first practical question and the most important one at this stage: are you eligible? Do you have not just what it takes, but what it takes in formal terms, degree, professional experience, citizenship, and the like? Do you qualify for this particular competition? So a couple of points there. The first one is, as with every competition, this is also a pretty classic one based on the current rules. You need to fill or fulfill certain general conditions. And these three, no surprise there. You need to be an EU citizen, so have a citizenship of the 27 member states of the EU. You need to have fulfilled your military obligations if that is compulsory in your country. And there are about a handful of countries in Europe or in the EU that require you to serve in the military or be formally exempted from that. And number three is that you need to have or need to meet the character requirements of an EU official. So that kind of relates to perhaps a security clearing or criminal record or something along those lines. This is not particularly difficult to fill, and I don't think there are any, or there's any significant number of candidates who may not jump through this particular hurdle. Having said that, let's take a look at the language rules. So language rules, pretty straightforward in this competition as well. So we talk about language 1 and language 2. Language 1 is what you see on the screen, pretty much any of the EU's 24 official languages, and the level is C1 level. That practically means you need to be pretty fluent in writing and in spoken language in that particular language. EU24 language, so any of the official EU24 languages. So even if you speak Russian or you speak Catalan, those are not among the 24 official EU languages, even though many other languages are spoken inside the borders of the European Union, but it has to be one of the 24 official languages. And then language 2 must be English. Interesting point. So the first language cannot be the same as language 2. So the first one cannot be English. So I'm Hungarian, my mother tongue is Hungarian, and then I speak some other languages, but my choice is completely decoupled from my passport. So regardless of which country's citizen you may be, you can choose any of the 24 official languages. I would choose French as language 1, and then English as language 2. or I could choose Hungarian as language 1 and still English as language 2, because in this particular competition, language 2 must be English. What I cannot do is choose English as language 1 and then also English as language 2. Pretty straightforward. What I generally advise candidates, if you speak multiple languages, is to choose a language as language 1 in which you can process information the quickest. So if you're able to read and process information and analyze texts pretty quickly in a given language, then choose that one. And let's say in my personal case, maybe I would consider English because texts maybe are a little shorter there or a little more to the point given the nature of that language, and the speed at which I might process the information might be faster than another language that I speak. Why do I say that? Is because language 1 is the one in which certain tests will be conducted, whereas most of the assessment center is done in English. So that's where your active expression, your oral presentation skills, your writing skills become more important. So you want to focus on that active use of language 2, whereas language 1 may be a bit more passive. So I think I've covered everything that is to be known about languages, and I'll just peek from the corner of my eye if there are any questions. I do see a couple of questions coming in, though these are coming in about more substantive questions regarding the qualifications and degrees and stuff like that. So we'll get to that in a few moments. So with that, let's move on and actually look at those. So look at the qualifications and the work experience or professional experience as they are referred to, and see what the rules say. Now, it's a bit complex. It's a bit complex because there are quite a few variations and permutations. So I'll really do my best not to get confused or make sure that I don't give you inaccurate information. So take a look at the screen, take a look at notice of competition, but I'll very quickly walk you through that, and I'm going to look at the questions that are out there and try to answer those, and I see that there are quite a few coming in. So with that, as you see, there are 3 fields, right, in this competition, 3 profiles that you need to choose from. So energy, climate, and environment. Now, what's common for all 3 is there are 2 scenarios. Now, scenario 1, as you can see, you need to have completed a 4-year university degree, followed by 3 years of relevant experience. Now, the degree has to be related to the field, and they give a broad list of fields that qualify as relevant for your degree. And then you have this criterion of 3 years of relevant work experience. And I understand that you may have had different work experiences or you worked on different projects. So the term relevant is still subject to some evaluation, right? In some cases, if you were an energy consultant and you advised, I don't know, pipeline operators, that's probably pretty clear. But if you were, or if you are a lawyer who specializes in network interconnectedness or interconnectivity, that probably sounds like very relevant, but there it might be, you need to demonstrate that, or you need to provide either a job description or a list of projects that you worked with and stuff like that, which is something that you will be asked in the talent screener later on. And that's something we'll come back to in a few moments. So scenario 1, 4-year relevant degree, 3 years of relevant work experience. And then scenario 2 is pretty much the reverse, where you might have a 3-year degree, relevant degree, and then 4 years of experience. So this is broadly about a bachelor versus a master's degree, again, by and large, and there are a lot of caveats and personal circumstances that might come into play. And then the work experience has to be 4 years if your studies were 3 years. And again, it has to be relevant. So it's, on a certain level, it's pretty straightforward. 3 plus 4, 4 plus 3, and both have to be relevant. So these are pretty straightforward and fairly clear conditions. And then the climate area, so field number 2 has a bit more uniqueness to it, and it has 2 more options which you may choose from depending on your personal circumstances. So the first one is, again, 4-year university diploma in a field that is different from the ones listed. So if you happen to be a researcher in ancient Greece, ancient Greek history, or you are a linguist, or you are a music theoretician, that could qualify as well, as long as you have 5 years of relevant work experience afterwards, right? So here, the degree does not need to be relevant to, or not to be among those that they listed, but then there is a higher requirement or more years of experience required, but the experience has to be relevant. And then option 2 could be 3 years of degree, but then 6 years of relevant experience. So the bottom line here is that they make an exception for those dealing with climate issues, that even if your underlying degree has nothing to do with the ones that they listed, with more relevant work experience, you can make up for that. So this is an interesting approach. My personal take on this is they probably want to enlarge the pool of candidates. So those who are perhaps in activist organizations or campaigning for something, so someone who has maybe gained or learned a lot of expertise, but their underlying qualification originally had nothing to do with climate, they would still be eligible and considered for this particular competition. So with that, here's a list, and this is not our comprehensive list. The comprehensive list is in the notice of competition. We provided a link there, but all of you would surely have that. So just to give you a snapshot of the kind of fields and areas that they listed as relevant degree or relevant qualification for the 3 or 4 year diplomas that you gain. So I'm not going to read it out. You can see energy, climate, and environment. What are the kind of topics, scientific, legal, environmental, and similar ones which would qualify? And it's pretty broad. We need to admit that it's pretty broad from biology, chemistry, life sciences, all the way to energy and similar studies, even law and economics would also qualify broadly for many of these fields. So perhaps I'll pause here for a second and I take a look at the many questions that are coming in. So here's one: do political science and European studies qualify? Well, to the best of my ability, as I recall, it may not. And then if you have doubts about it, there are 2 things you can do. One is you try to find out and you ask the EPSO through their contact form, contact center, or specifically the selection board, whether this particular degree is considered among the ones that are eligible. Or number 2, minimize your risk of being disqualified and go for the climate area, provided you have 5 or 6 years of relevant work experience in that field, and then you are not taking any particular risk with that decision. But again, as far as I recall, this would not be among the ones listed. If my team knows otherwise, or someone among the listeners know otherwise, please put that into the chat box so we crowdsource the answer to that particular question. And then, here I see that. So political and European sciences are social sciences, so they're qualified for the energy field. Yes, I agree with that assessment, actually, indeed. So I didn't recall specifically European studies, but they are indeed social studies, political science and European studies. So they would indeed qualify for the, the energy field, I believe. Next one. So does a PhD position in the energy field count as relevant professional experience? Typically, the rule of thumb for these competitions is that once you have obtained your underlying minimal required qualification, meaning a bachelor or a master's, the time afterwards would be considered as work experience. And as with many PhD studies, you might have had teaching obligations, or maybe you did that as part-time and you had your earning or let's say day job in parallel. So normally this would, that the time you spent on that would qualify as work experience. Then again, could you spell out what social sciences and humanities encompass? I'm afraid I can't answer that. So, and I wouldn't want to answer that. I wouldn't want to give you any sort of list aside from my own sort of gut reaction and my immediate thoughts, what that includes. I'm not sure that there's any list or any exhaustive or even just a couple of pointers kind of list for what social sciences actually include. I would think that for most studies or most universities, this is perhaps listed under the relevant headings, and I'm not aware of any guidance on that. I'm not aware of any guidance on that. You know, my first thought would be, again, yes, ask EPSO for their contact center. Make sure that if you have doubts, whether sociology or something, again, on political or political studies or international relations, that would very much count under the umbrella of social studies. But if you have a case or studies which you're doubtful about, rather ask them. Option number two, I'm thinking maybe look it up, whether, and we could certainly do that after this particular webinar, which perhaps maybe CLIMA, which is about professional qualifications, an EU agency, or another EU agency, or DG Education, would they have anything on this? There might be some official guidance or pointers as to what qualifies as social studies. And maybe EPSO itself has some guidance on that. So again, I'm giving you some pointers because I don't immediately know what exactly would fall under that. But in some cases, this is a no-brainer because you know that what you studied is indeed social studies. Right, next one. How many people typically apply for these kind of specialist competitions? I wish I could tell you that. Not that I don't want to, I wish I could give you some number. Typically, let's say, it's very hard to say anything across the board, because if it's nuclear scientists or if it's chemical engineers or competition lawyers, the numbers could be vastly different depending on earning situation in that particular profession, depending on how politically attractive those positions are, how many qualified people there are in those particular fields. Now, energy, climate, and environment, as I said in my introduction, extremely popular, extremely topical, and especially we're talking about the European institutions, which really deal with it as a central tenet of their policies. So there's probably a lot of political attractiveness there where you can shape things and not just talk about things or pass meaningless resolutions. You can actually contribute to the shaping of these policies. So I would guess that there will be several thousand candidates for these three competitions. This is not to discourage anyone or get you scared about your chances. It's just to be real, to take it seriously and really do your utmost to qualify and pass these competitions, because the competition itself is probably going to be very intense. With that, maybe one more question and then we go on. Do traineeships or paid internships count as work experience? Typically, yes, as long as they were done after you obtained your underlying required qualification. So once you got your diploma, whether it's a 3-year or 4-year, depending on which channel you want to apply for, once you obtain that, and then you went on an internship, that will be considered as work experience. So that clock was actually ticking for the purposes of counting your years of work experience. So with that, let's go on and see what else you need to keep in mind and which other conditions you need to fill in order to pass the competition and eventually be an EU official working on energy, climate, or environment issues. Now, before I get there, just one little segment or a bit of a segue to the benefits that the job includes. Now, this is for every permanent civil service job that the European Union has to offer, because you will work based on the conditions that are laid out in the staff regulations. So the staff regulations certainly talk a lot about the salary calculation, depending on which, well, not so much which country you're coming from, but which geographic location you might be relocating from to work for the European institutions, and in this particular case, to work in Brussels. And it also takes into account your family situation, whether you're married, whether you have kids, and some other factors. So we have a salary calculator on our website. Just a word of caution that we are updating that. So the current formula that salary calculator on the EU training website uses is not fully accurate, and there have been a lot of refinements since we put that online. So currently we're working on updating that to make sure that you get accurate information. So what you can simulate there shows a little higher figure than the current figures are, but it's still a very attractive salary proposition, because based on even the latest formula, it's around 6,240 euros if those conditions that you see on the screen are met. Now, if you don't have kids or you're not married, still it doesn't decrease significantly. It's in the 5,500 and 6,000 range. So that's a pretty attractive proposition. And not only that, but you have European schools, you have health benefits, meaning health insurance, and certainly the inherent value of working on meaningful topics in an international organization that the European Union is, a very special kind of international organization it is, and just doing real meaningful work. I think that is also a very powerful factor and a very attractive factor for many of you, for many candidates. So with that, let's go back for a second to the criteria and to the other conditions that are worth knowing. And I did mention already where the place of work is going to be. So it's Brussels. In other cases, it could be other cities or even beyond Brussels or beyond Brussels, Luxembourg, in different EU capitals or around the world. But for this particular competition, given the nature of the duties, it is Brussels. And it's DG Energy, DG CLIMA and DG Environment. Essentially, these are the three DGs inside the European Commission that are looking to hire permanent staff for these particular fields. Now, how to get one of these jobs? We've spoken, or we've talked about so far, of many of the formal criteria, such as the general ones. Then there was the linguistic aspect, and then we spoke about the qualifications and the work experience. So these are the formal part, and you either have it or you don't, though it's not so black or white, because certain degrees, certain work experience may be looked at differently depending on how you present it, depending on how you frame it. So that it becomes a very important angle of not only have gained a certain experience, but present that in the most convincing manner that you qualify for these criteria. And that's something we're going to talk about, because there is an important element in the process called the talent screener. What is a talent screener? How do you fill it in? How do you optimize your chances? That's something we will look at in a few seconds. So provided you meet all these criteria about the language, the general, the background, and the work experience parts, and you picked the right language from the EU24, you are then required to fill in this so-called talent screener. The talent screener is actually only in English. And there have been a lot of controversy about this, whether it should be English and French, or English, French, German, or English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, or all 24 languages. But in this particular case, probably due to practical and project management reasons, or to make sure that they can quickly process the incoming applications, they have picked English as the only language in which you can fill in the talent screener by the 22nd of November. Now, what is a talent screener? So a talent screener is an interesting way to evaluate candidates, to screen candidates, as the name suggests, whether their profile, their background, their expertise truly fits what EPSO and the selection board is actually looking for. Now, it's a question and an answer form. So it's a sort of a Q&A form that you need to fill in. And it's really under the Am I eligible to apply part of the notice of competition, where they ask you very pointed, very relevant questions so they can decide based on your answers whether you should proceed to the next stage or not. So you certainly have a lot of interest in filling it in the best possible way. Find the right words, find the right formula, find the right way of presenting information, because a lot depends on your answers and how those are going to be assessed, evaluated by the selection board members. So with that, what's a talent screener? I just mentioned it. And how is it scored? It's usually scored on a scale of 0 to 3 per question. And then there's a number of questions out there. They would add up the scores that you got, and on that basis, they will decide whether or not you can pass to the next stage or not. So one piece of advice, and you're going to see that in the screen in a moment, of how to maximize your score, is try to answer every question, even if you don't really know whether you meet that criteria or not. But having said that, it's okay not to tick all the boxes. So if some questions you just really don't have that particular experience, or you really cannot come up with a sensible answer for that particular question, it's okay to leave one or two unanswered, or just simply saying, I don't have this kind of expertise. You can still pass, provided you have the right answers in the other questions. So what can you do? A couple of tips. We actually have a webinar, which I think I did, or perhaps we did that with Jan, don't remember exactly, but we've done quite a few trainings and specific webinars on the talent screener and how to maximize your answers. And a lot depends on your written communication skills. So there are a lot of pieces of advice we share in those webinars, but also in the next few moments, I'm going to do a quick snapshot of those pieces of advice of what you can do to come across in a more persuasive manner. Obviously, you want to be truthful and you want to stay ethical. You're not going to make up information. You're not going to lie in the talent screener just to optimize your points, because it can really, really backfire already in the talent screener or perhaps at a later stage. Having said that, you still want to make sure that the information you have, the background, the experience you've gained, you package that in a way that really persuades, really convinces the talent screen, the evaluators, the assessors, that you merit a certain number of points for those particular questions. Now, how can you do that? Well, as I said before, try to answer yes to as many questions as you can, as long as it stays within the ethical and practical boundaries. And not only that, but make sure that your answers are very concrete. When you say, I have many years of experience in the energy sector, that's a good opening statement, but it's insufficient to prove a point. You want to come up with specific examples. What was the budget of a project that you worked on? How many years? Did you cooperate with a certain number of people in different countries? Name those countries. Mention the number of people that you worked with. What was the impact of your work? How many public tenders did you apply for? And how serious were those? Try to give facts and figures and numbers to demonstrate the scale and to substantiate certain points that you're making in your answers for the talent screener or those particular questions where these are relevant. And then aside from that, try to provide really relevant information and not just high-level stuff. You don't want to just fill it with cliches and stuff that is meaningless, that I'm extremely committed to securing European energy supplies. Wonderful, but what does it mean in practice? What have you done in your work? Which organizations have you cooperated with? Was it actually the European Commission, or are you currently a temporary agent in the Commission and you're working on an important file, or you are at a national authority and you actively cooperate with other national authorities? So make sure that you're really specific and you demonstrate your statements by listing these examples. And then there are some questions which are pretty similar to each other. So some questions may look like another one that you've already answered, and some candidates, actually more than some candidates, we've seen hundreds, if not thousands of talent screener replies, obviously not in this competition, but similar ones. And many candidates tend to just copy paste earlier answers because they don't have the motivation or the patience to truly customize their responses to any given question. So in those cases, I urge you to deeply think about what the question actually is asking you about and customize your reply to that particular question. That sometimes means that you need to reorder your bullet points or your replies. You may need to emphasize different points and not the others. So make sure that you do spend a bit of time thinking how to best prove your point for that particular answer. And then general pieces of advice and general tips on clear writing and good written expression apply in this case as well. What do I mean by that? You want to format and present your answers in the best possible way. So you can use bullet points, you can do subheaders, you can structure your message in nice paragraphs. So there's a lot that you can do even if there are no bolding and underlining and big headers and small headers and all the rest. Still, you can help the reader, help the assessor read through your answers, process the information, scan the information in the quickest possible way. Because if you write extremely long paragraphs or you don't break the text down into pieces, you may lose the attention of the assessor. They may not find the most important information in your text because it gets buried in the entire body of the information you present them. So be sure that you help them help you. You help them process the information by presenting a visual structure that is clear and to the point. Now, EU institutions, EPSO, are pretty formal. So if you're not working inside institutions or you've never worked with EU institutions before, you might want to look up DG Environment, DG CLIMA, DG Energy, their website, their annual report. Get a bit familiar with the kind of language or abbreviations or things that they use, because you can apply that in your responses. It will resonate better with those who are evaluating your application and your talent screener because you speak the same language. Sometimes you may use terminology. Typical example, sustainability can mean very different things to very different people depending on which institution they might be sitting in. So make sure that you use a certain term or terminology in a way that the institutions do as well. What's in it for them? That's a little bit of a job applicant's approach. This is not specifically a job application, and yet it's a hurdle you need to clear. It's a step in the application process. So you might want to present your expertise and your background in a way that resonates with the institutions, to say, how can you and your background, how can it contribute to the work of the European institutions in that particular field? And then last but not least, here's a link to the webinar that I presented some time ago. Feel free to check it out. We also have some tips and tricks articles that go a little deeper and I give more examples on the different tricks. So check those out, and I trust that it will be helpful for your particular application. Not only that, we also provide application assistance. So if you already have your talent screener and you want to have that reviewed by a professional who's not a climate, energy, or environment expert, but someone who knows these methods, maybe I can call them tricks, to present the information in the best possible way, we're happy to do that sort of review. That's a paid service, and do not leave that to the last moment, because we often get a lot of requests closer to the deadline, but that's something we offer to all candidates. So with that, assessment center, before I get there, I see one or two other questions coming in. So how often are these positions looking for new 86 candidates? It's annually, biannually, sporadic. I'd say sporadic, especially now, and that's not something I've already mentioned, but I will do it now. EPSO is changing their selection process. So that doesn't seem to be a radical overhaul of this system that I'm presenting to you right now, but they are reforming it. So they are going to put new exam announcements on hold, most likely until May 2023. So for about 5 months, 6 months, they're not going to announce any new competitions. And even afterwards, we don't yet know which topics and which areas they will announce competitions for. So to answer this particular question, we cannot say with any certainty whether it's annual or biannual, or how regularly or how often they might announce this kind of jobs. So grab onto this opportunity now, because that's for sure, and we don't know what the future might hold. And then, do you know the salary consideration? What would it be if you previously lived in Belgium for more than 6 months, but then moved from there to another country for more than a year? I believe in that case, you would need to move back to Brussels, and given the fact that you spent over a year away from here, you would be eligible for the expatriation allowance or relocation assistance and similar budget headings. So then pretty much you would need to move here for the job as if you had always lived outside of Belgium. All right, maybe one more before I move on. So about a professional experience, can it be in any EU official language, or does it have to be in English? No, certainly it doesn't need to be in English. So if you worked in Romania or in Bulgaria or in Portugal or Estonia, obviously you don't need to have worked in English. This is about presenting the information as part of your application process, but it's entirely different from the actual substance and the years you spent in a given job. All right, let's go on. I see there are one or two more questions I haven't yet answered, but we'll try to get back to that on. And let's take a look at the assessment center. So provided you fulfilled all the criteria about the general conditions, the language, the diploma and work experience, and you filled out the talent screener to the best of your abilities, and it persuaded the assessors that you are indeed eligible for this competition and you have a great profile, that's when you get called in to the assessment center. Typically, they would invite 3 times as many people to the assessment center as the number of places on the reserve list. So you do the maths, and roughly there are about 50 places for each profiles. So around 150 individuals will be invited to the assessment center in each of these 3 profiles. Now, where is the assessment center in this competition? It's online, just the same way as it's been in the past roughly 2 years. We'll see whether that changes or not, but most likely it will not change. And especially because the kind of exams that they have are pretty well adapted to be done online or even in test centers like the abstract verbal numerical reasoning tests. So let's talk about these. Abstract verbal numerical reasoning tests are almost always part of the selection procedure, sometimes before the assessment center and sometimes as part of the assessment center. So in this case, it's part of the assessment center package. Anyone who is invited to the assessment center will need to sit this particular, these kind of tests. So the abstract verbal numerical tests, often referred to as CBT, computer-based tests. And maybe just a few words about what these are or how it works in this particular case. It's in language 1, hence my earlier comment on choosing a language that you really can process information in pretty fast. And what do they look like? Well, I would assume many candidates would be pretty familiar with these by this point, but quickly run through. Verbal reasoning is a logical test. So it's not just about reading comprehension, but making certain logical deductions from a certain text passage. And then you need to think which answer option is the most accurate or is the accurate answer and pick that one. So sometimes they would use generalizations or similar wording and other tricks to mislead you, but then there's always one answer which is accurate. And in this case, you have 20 questions and 35 minutes. Again, it's a pretty standard time allocation, not very easy, certainly, to read the text, find a good answer, but doable. And then you have numerical reasoning, where you have a chart, usually with data, not a fully fledged Excel sheet, but a table with numbers and figures, and you need to figure out how to quickly calculate or at least estimate and then pick the right answer in relation to that chart. Here in this competition, you have 10 questions and 20 minutes. So again, pretty standard timing, but it's a pretty heavy time pressure, so you need to work fast. And then also, at least, you have the abstract reasoning, which is 10 questions and 10 minutes. For many candidates, is the toughest, where you have these certain charts and figures which move around according to a certain logic, and you need to find the next one in the sequence. The good news is, given the fact that this test or these tests are part of the assessment center, the threshold to pass is relatively low. So you need to get only the pass mark. So you are not competing against other candidates when it comes to abstract, verbal, and numerical reasoning. All you need to do is to, again, jump through this hurdle in a way that they add up the scores. So the maximum achievable score is 40, and you need to have at least 20 points. And as long as you have 20 points, you pass, and your assessment center score will only depend on your performance with the other exams, but not this one. So this doesn't count to your overall score. This is a checkbox that you need to tick. Once you did that, you move on to the rest. And 20 points, that means that even if you get 0 points on abstract reasoning, you can still pass as long as you have sufficient points with numerical and verbal. The more challenging part, perhaps, of the assessment center comes at this point, where you have 3 exams, 2 of which relate to your general competencies. So there's a competency framework. It's public, it's out there. We also have an ebook on that. We have tips and tricks. We have lots of materials on what these mean and how you can optimize your preparation for these tests. And essentially, you have 2 tests that evaluate your competencies, those 8 competencies. And these 2 tests are the ones you see on the screen. One is a case study, and the other one is a situational competency-based interview, which is a special kind of interview based on a background file that they send you before the exam. So there's a case study, that's a written exercise, as the name suggests, and the SCBI, which is based on a background file, and it's a live interview with the assessors. Now, the good news is, on our website on EU Training, you can find simulations. You can even find a service where we evaluate your case study and provide you personalized feedback. And we have several excellent top-notch coaches and trainers who provide group and individual sessions to prepare you for the SCBI or any other test that you may have. But in this particular case, it's these 2 plus 1. And what is that plus 1? That's the FRI. That's our own internal abbreviation for field-related interview. So that's an interview which is broadly based on your background and the talent screener, but it's essentially about evaluating, testing your knowledge in that particular field. So how much do you know about energy, about climate, about environment, depending on which field you have applied for. So obviously you don't need to know much, or you're not going to be tested on issues which are strictly in the domain of another field, which is different from the one you applied for. So this really focuses on the field that you have chosen from those 3 options. So with that, what is the pass mark? The 40 points out of 80 for the general competencies, and then 50 out of 100 for the field related. So you can see that the scoring wants you, or it's geared towards evaluating your general competencies as a future EU official, but obviously you need to know stuff. You need to understand and know well the subject matter in which you're going to be working. So these two are added up, and that's when they do a ranking. That's when they will look at how you compare to other candidates, and the top X number of candidates will be placed on the reserve list. And once they're on the reserve list, we know how many places there are. It has a certain validity, but for specialist competitions like this, it's often much longer than 1 year, or they can extend it, but they want to make sure that whoever is on the reserve list, as long as you still wish to be recruited, will be recruited. Certainly your personal circumstances might change in the meantime, but the vast majority, 90% and above of those on the reserve list, will be hired by the institutions. So that's the recruitment part, where you actually get to start working. So how to get the job, a couple of general pieces of advice, very much depends on your current preparation or preparedness level. Very much depends on how much you know about a certain topic, how familiar you are with the system and with the subject matter, but then prepare for quite a few weeks. Don't leave it to the last moment. Maybe an hour a week, maybe every third day, but make it regular. You might want to create a study group with some friends, even if they might be competitors, but still to keep the motivation up, to make sure that you understand the methodology. It has a methodology. There are ways where you can quickly prepare for the assessment center, where you can optimize your answers for the talent screener. So everything I've covered so far broadly relates to the idea that there is a system to it. It's not completely random and not completely ad hoc. And then being persistent, do not give up. It's a lengthy process, might take 9 to 12 months from the application until you are hired. So it does take a fair bit amount of time, and keep up your motivation and your interest throughout the process. And then doing lots of simulation, depending on which exam phase you are currently preparing for. So with that, we're really here to help. Let us know. With the website, we've put incredible amount of resources. As I said, a lot of them are free, some are paid. Our team really knows this stuff, so feel free to get in touch, send a message. We're happy to help. And even if we ourselves may not know the answer, we're going to point you to a resource or to some site where you can actually find out for yourself. And then with the simulated practice test, we're very proud to have verbal reasoning tests in all 24 official languages of the EU. So no matter what your language might be, we have verbal reasoning practice tests, and then numerical and abstract reasoning as well. As I said, webinars and live coaching and live training is also available for you. So with those various resources, which I've mentioned so far, let me just put this one up where you can find other members, or let's say other candidates who are preparing for the same exam. And then last but not least, there's the EU test book, but then last but not least, the special discount that I mentioned at the beginning while I answer a couple of questions. You can take note of the code. It's EPSO-ECE-22, and it's valid for 48 hours, so for 2 days from the moment of this particular live session right now. So until the 23rd of October at 6 p.m. So having said that, let me take a quick look at the final questions before we finish off in respect of everyone's lunchtime, if you are in continental time zone. So how long will it take from the deadline of application until the invitation to the assessment center? Hard to tell, but my guess would be, well, given the fact that it's the 22nd of November, the deadline, perhaps around February, give or take, but that's my guess. That's my guess, perhaps an educated guess, but still a guess. But it gives you a rough idea that it's not immediate, that it's a couple of weeks, and then there's the New Year and Christmas holidays and all the rest. If you join through the specialist competition and work for DG CLIMA for 3 years, can you move on to other DGs later on? You can absolutely do that, indeed. So the staff regulation grants you the right to keep your administrative position, so it's 86 or wherever you might be, and then move to another DG, even move to another EU institution, in which the position is under the staff regulations. So you have those acquired rights as a civil servant, and as long as you're accepted to work in another DG or another institution, you keep those acquired status when you move on. If my education is 3 years bachelor's in a different field and 1 year master's in a relevant field, am I eligible to apply? Interesting question. My sort of immediate answer for this, sort of the gut reaction would be probably no, but then again, you might want to check, because my understanding is that the studies have to be fully relevant. So not just part of it, but the entire package. So again, you probably want to minimize risk of disqualification, but still, you can definitely ask the selection board, and they might have some guidance, or they might point you to further resources on this. And then final question before we finish off. So in the talent screener, we have at least 1 year of experience. There's a question whether we have at least 1 year of experience in a specific task. Could this one be split among different jobs we've had? To me, it sounds yes. So it doesn't seem that they want that experience to be continuous 1 year experience. So as long as overall, on aggregate, you have that year and you can prove it one way or another, well, and certainly you make declarations and you give specific examples, perhaps even the time periods during which you worked on that particular area. As a first step, that's great. And if ever you are asked and you can provide some proof of that, whether it's a project description or just a declaration on honor from your previous employer, presumably that should do. Boom, very good. So given the time right now, and make sure that we stick broadly within the 1 hour frame, I will stop here. And a heartfelt thanks for Agi and for Rita and all the other members of our team who helped put this all together. So thank you so much. And thanks for everyone who participated at the live session, and really an honor to spend this virtual time with you during your lunch break, or at least for most of your lunch break. And for others who are way beyond, maybe a Friday afternoon this is a good investment in your future career. And as I said before, if we can be helpful with anything else, you have questions, we will be very happy to answer through our customer support. Do get in touch with us and check out the number of resources we put or we made available on our website. And I hope we can continue this conversation and provide you with the most relevant EPSO preparation services there is. So thanks again, much appreciated, and to be continued hopefully soon. Bye everyone.